We are back with another episode of the Do As I Say, Not As I Did podcast. And as always, the name kind of explains everything. We're giving you advice based on everything we did wrong the first time. And each week I do that by bringing on founders, investors, product experts, technology future sales gurus, and just about anyone who is incredibly smart and can help us work out how to build a great business together. And then together, we answer the questions about what is going on in your lives and in your businesses that either people send in or we find them by going down deep Reddit holes to find the best questions. The guests have never heard these questions, so they're hearing it live for the first time just alongside with you. So if you do have questions or you're trying to put out fires, send us an email and we'll workshop it on the show. So send those emails through to podcast@joelditrapani.com. I know that is a mouthful, so as always, that is in the show notes as well, so you can just copy and paste that one. You don't have to try and figure out my name. And then I'm your host, Joel DiTrapani. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Vigo. It's an edtech scale-up. We've grown through Australia. We've grown through the UK. Now we're continuing to grow that on through into the US. On top of that, I'm an advisor and a coach in the product space where I help startups and businesses work out how to build great product teams, because that is the secret to building great products. And that is something I absolutely got wrong the first time. And today, I'm super excited to be joined by Casey Flint, an investor at SquarePeg, a global investment firm based in Australia that is on a mission to empower exceptional founders. They invest in the first round onward for Aussie, Kiwi, Israeli, and Southeast Asian businesses. Before her entry into the world of venture, Casey led strategy and planning at Uber very early into their expansion into Australia, which was a part of an explosive growth in the region. And from everything I hear, just a super cowboy time in Uber's history where it was just kind of like, do whatever you want. On top of that, Casey loves to write and share about the startup world and regularly shares genuinely useful content, which I don't think there's much of in the world. Her most recent post is one of my favorites, and essentially has the headline of "Don't be too nice to the people you manage," which is an approach that I've been taking a lot more of recently. But my American audience might find this particularly interesting, is that Casey is actually from Outback Australia. So who knows, but my guess was riding in kangaroo pouches and mustering dingoes. But Casey is an absolute expert at strategy and operations and really takes the time to understand the mechanics behind what makes a business great. So let's jump into it. Welcome, Casey. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad we were able to find the time.
We did have to reschedule quite a few times, but we got here eventually. But tell me, what are you working on at the moment? Where's your focus going right now?
Yeah, at this very moment, this week, I am working on an investment into a pretty exciting AI company. And so the most exciting part of the job is definitely when you meet those founders that you're like, wow, I really want to go on the journey with these folks and I want to be spending more time with them as they kind of tackle this exciting mission. And so it's a very energizing week for me in that respect. But I'm also spending a lot of time on AI more broadly. So meeting a lot of researchers, developers, ML engineers. I was just over in the US where I spent a week in San Francisco, and then I was at NeurIPS, which is kind of the premier conference for AI specifically focused on natural language processing. And so a lot of time dedicated there. Otherwise, I'm just working with our portfolio companies, helping them in whatever way they need help with. So that's kind of how I spend my time. And looking for new founders, of course.
I love it. I feel like so much of your job is around meeting founders, looking at businesses, trying to understand the business. But I feel like where I find your content especially interesting is that so much of your time, like outside of almost like the 9 to 5 of investment, is just deeply understanding new elements in technology and new parts and seeing what's coming forward. So I've always loved the fact that even though you have to, keep up this deal flow, you're constantly giving back to the industry so much by writing about these learnings that you're doing. It seems like above and beyond from what investors that I see generally.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's more like an interest in paying it forward in the sense that my parents were both entrepreneurs. I dabbled with founding things whilst I was at Uber. And I also was that kind of university student who was at every pitch night, and I was at Fishburners every weekend, and I was at every startup weekend. I just thrived on the kind of ecosystem around startups even before I was, more broadly a part of the ecosystem. And so I definitely see an opportunity to just share what I've learned, because I think that being on the other side of the table, you get an exposure to the world of startups and how they operate in a way that most people don't. And so I really love just sharing the things that I've been able to learn in that capacity.
I love it. Well, let's share some more today, and let's jump into the challenges or the questions. So
sounds good.
The first question is called, how can I raise money internationally? I'm a software developer with over 6 years of experience. I've always wanted to start my own company, but have never done so. I'm based in Bosnia, a quote, third world country. So I'm facing quite a few local limitations regarding getting investment and networking. Given the successful idea validation, I plan to open a company in the UK and then look for funding to build an MVP, as current projections indicate that the cost to develop an MVP would be around 150 to 200k. I'd love any tips or advice that can help me through this journey. Thanks to everyone in advance. From Dimness7. So I thought this would be a great question for you, Casey, because obviously you're helping Australians and people from different regions get investment early that aren't in America or UK, like the kind of major markets. But so much of these, the startups here have to try and go overseas. So what is the advice that you give to people looking to potentially raise overseas?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's, again, a really fun part of my role is that we do cover international markets. So we're in Southeast Asia, Israel, Australia, and New Zealand. And I've always loved that about Square Peg. I think for this particular founder, the advice that I heard really early on when I first became a VC that I've shared is to treat it a bit like a sales process. And generally, when you're kicking off a sales process, you develop a list of leads. I think for this founder, what I would be doing is getting like you can get a temporary account on something like Crunchbase or PitchBook, which is the kind of data sets that venture capitalists use to try and look for other investors or look at startups. And I would be trying to segment the investors in that database a few different ways. So if you're based in Bosnia and you're finding it hard to find investment from investors overseas, one thing that I would look at is VCs that have invested in other companies in Bosnia, which is something that you can filter on. I'd also look at VCs that have invested in your particular space. So for example, when we've helped some of our deep tech companies raise, we've looked at PitchBook or Crunchbase and seen, okay, these are all of the VCs around the world that have invested in quantum computing, for example, and these are the VCs that invested at a similar kind of stage or similar check size in quantum computing. And then we use that to go, okay, who can we kind of get warm introductions to off the base of that list? And that acts as our like sales pipeline and our initial lead list. So you can use find VCs that have invested in your country, find VCs who invested in your type of company, VCs that have invested in your stage. There are also some international VCs that have a really strong interest in emerging markets. And so you could try and find VCs that talk about interest in that. I think that's a little bit harder to filter for in something like a PitchBook or a Crunchbase, but that's an approach. So if you can kind of preempt or pre-understand that interest in investing in those types of markets, I think that sets you off to a better start, rather than kind of what I get a lot of in my inbox is people cold inbounding me from different countries asking for investment. And I'm just like, it's kind of a waste of their time because I can't invest in those countries because we only cover 3 different regions.
I think that's a great approach. I guess it's very close to the way I think about it. Probably just maybe put a little bit more eloquently, but the way I think about finding the right investors for you, and this is whether you're in the same country as the VC or not, or in the right market or not. But I think there's just a shitload of VCs in the world. There's so many venture capital firms out there. So I just imagine like there's this massive pool of VCs of maybe 10,000 or 1,000. I don't know how many there are. But then I've just got to whittle it down and down and down and down until I find the right ones for me. So for Vigo, I'm like, okay, we're headquartered in Australia. Most of our revenue's in Australia. A big chunk is in the UK. So I'm like, okay, what are the VCs that are open to investing in headquartered and Australian or UK revenue companies? Okay, that cuts it down by 20%. Then I'm like, okay, which VCs are open to education, the market that we're in? All right. Which VCs are open to enterprise SaaS? Which VCs are open to founding teams based in different countries? And you just got to go down and whittle it further and further and further down. And then you'll end up with a pretty small list of VCs, but you don't need a giant list of VCs. You need a list of highly targeted VCs. So absolutely agree. Find the VCs, the small pool of VCs that are a fit for you. And then maybe get some people who aren't quite a fit, and just outside of that, maybe more neutral, not perfect fit, but a little bit of an okay fit. Use them as practice VCs, but make sure you know roughly why you would be a fit or not for these VCs. Then as soon as you have that list of VCs, follow Ryan Breslow's fundraising process. Read the book Fundraising by Ryan Breslow and just start building really strong relationships with them. I think one thing that the way this question's written by Dimness is I've got this idea. Why doesn't a VC just give me money? It's well, they're not going to. Like, unless your idea is so insane and you're a very proven founder from before, like, and you've got some kind of like patent for some reason because you've just come out of university, like, you're not going to get invested on an idea. Like, you need to build these relationships with VCs and start to give them confidence that you're the right fit. So follow the process of building relationships. Reach out. Don't just say, I need money right now. Like, because the reality is it won't happen. Then kind of like the last pillar of my advice would be, don't expect that you're going to get money to build an MVP. Like, that feels to me very unlikely. Like, I think it's kind of a waste of time to think like that. Use all of your effort in improving and validating your idea. So it sounds like you have some validation, but you're going to need more validation from having an MVP. So work out what's the scrappiest version of this. What's the smallest possible version that can prove out your idea, and start to get some early sales, start to get some early traction, or whatever your idea is. Start to get those proof points that VCs are going to start to believe in your idea alongside with you. And just know, maybe Casey doesn't agree with this, but like, if you're coming from a smaller market, like, I believe if you're coming from Australia, I bet it's even harder in Bosnia or other markets that have less of a startup scene. It's just harder for you to get funding. Like, the reality is, it's just going to be harder. The pool is smaller, so it's going to be harder for you. There's less proof in your market. So even if your market's growing, that means because it's harder, you have to work harder and you have to have even more validation than some other startups, which is unfair, but it's the reality. So just outwork, out-validate, out-prove that this is your destiny to do this. And then VCs will come on if you've got the right VCs and you've started the right process to build the relationships early. That's kind of where I land, Casey. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's all fantastic advice. I absolutely agree. I think, yeah, it's interesting thinking about smaller markets. For the most part, I agree. It is a bit harder. You just have a much larger pool and a place that has a more developed venture ecosystem like the US. There are just simply more VCs. And so the probability that you're going to meet one that gives you money is higher. I do think, yeah, it's interesting on the MVP point. I was having a conversation with a founder about this just yesterday. They were starting a social media platform and they were hoping to get money before having to build the MVP. And that's fair enough. You know, it's a big risk to step out of a job or something like that and not have the financial stability. And so, of course, you want the financial stability to go out and do the build. But I think for something, it depends a little bit, actually, I think, on the type of business. For social in particular, a lot of VCs feel the main risk is whether it will get resonance with customers and whether you're actually able to cut through all of the noise in consumer to actually get traction. Whereas that risk profile is seen very differently to maybe a more generic kind of B2B SaaS business where it's much easier to paint a case for why your customers would want this. And so less of the risk is around adoption. And so maybe you're willing to actually put in to build the MVP. So we kind of don't look at it on a, we look at it on a case by case basis, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, that word risk is really key there. Like, when you're a founder and you've got this idea and you're solving this problem, like, like, this is fucking it. This is going to be huge. And like, there's no question there for you. But an investor doesn't think like that. It's a risk play for them. And there are different levers that you can pull to increase their trust in the idea or like reduce the perceived risk for them. And some of the ways you can reduce that perceived risk is like, having had a successful business in the past. If you've got that, it reduces risk quite a bit. Maybe they will back you earlier. But if you haven't got that, if you don't have like that, VC pedigree, then it's going to be around like proof that your business works. And then depending on the business type, like you're saying, Casey, like it's either traction or sales or pre-sales, or like you need to work out what enough proof is in your particular business. But I just think like if it's your first business, you have to have some proof before you're going to get a VC to come along.
Yeah. And I think just on that, I wouldn't underestimate as well, or I would personally also go and look for things like grants or maybe accelerator programs that have very friendly terms. Just be wary of the kind of terms you're being given. But there are a lot of grants, in particular in Australia and in particular for female founders or more marginalized founders. And I think that's a really great way to get that initial bit of cash to give you the security to build out an MVP, even when a VC won't. And so I definitely look at that. And the other advantage is that grants are often equity free. And so you don't have to dilute yourself in the really early days. And the longer you can wait to dilute yourself, so the more traction you can get before you go to VCs, the less you're going to need to dilute yourself because you're going to get a larger valuation that's proportionate to the amount of traction or the amount of progress that you've made.
Yeah. Yeah. grants is a great idea. So if you can find international and national grants, that's a great idea. All right, so we'll try and wrap this one up. So, Dimness, you're based in a smaller market and you want to raise money, but there are a lot of limitations in your market about trying to raise money. So what do? The first thing is, I guess as always, find as many people you can around you to support you, mentors, coaches, and stuff like that. Like you can definitely find them online. I think that's like will always help with kind of like every part that you want to go down. The second is find the right VC for you. Not every VC is going to be applicable to you. So get PitchBook or get Crunchbase or any of these kind of platforms that have all these like thousands and thousands of VCs on there and work out which ones are open to your industry, to your market, to your level of traction, to round size, to terms, and just whittle it down further and further and further until you have that small group. Then start building relationships with them from day one and getting to know them, to see what their thesis is, to build trust that you are a good founder. And then lastly is just prove out way more validation in your idea and your business than you think is necessary. If you think you need to go, 10% of the way down the road to proving your idea, you probably need to go 70%. It's much harder to get a VC to trust that this is the right business than you expect because you have so much inherent trust. And lastly, get grants. Go for grants. That's it. All right. What have I missed there, Casey? What else?
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't entirely agree with the perspective of getting a lot more traction than you expect, in the sense that I think your advice about building a relationship with VCs is excellent. And I think the classic phrase that people say is VCs invest in lines and not dots. And what they mean is if they just meet you for the first time, they've only got a little dot and they don't have any kind of history to compare that to. They can't see your trajectory. I think one of the advantages of building a relationship, even outside of the context of when you're ready to raise, is you can get feedback from them on what they're actually expecting. And maybe that helps you calibrate where you need to be in terms of progress to actually get them interested. I know that can be a little bit frustrating with VCs because they're not always incredibly straightforward, but you'd be surprised by the small number of founders who ask me, what specifically do you want to see from me the next time we meet, and really just run at that. I recall a company in our portfolio we invested in, we passed on their earlier rounds, and we had this one major risk that was really bothering us that we communicated, and everything else we felt pretty happy about. And they just really blew me away in the sense that we got caught up for a coffee. They weren't raising. It was 6 months later, and they were like, oh, Casey, we know that you guys were concerned about this, this, and this that falls under this category. This is all the progress that we've made. And that was really impressive to me because they really took it on board and ran at that particular issue. And then we were able to invest in the next round, which is awesome. And I'm so happy they're part of the portfolio. So I think I'm a little bit wary to say people should run at it for longer than they think they need to. I think you're probably right that people underestimate what VCs want from them, but at the same time, you can use VCs to calibrate, and that can be part of the relationship development. And one more point I'll make is that I was listening to a really great podcast on the weekend, and it was someone from Benchmark, I can't recall the name, and they were saying that the best founders to them, the most impressive founders, are incredibly truth-seeking, and they really lean into what they don't know, and they use VCs to mine them for the information and the knowledge that they have, and they just want to get to like the base truth of what's important for their business and understand all of the assumptions that they've made and whether they're accurate or not. I think the founders that I'm less impressed by lean away from their concerns and lean away from VC concerns, and the best ones lean into them. And that develops a lot of trust with the VC because VCs know that nothing's perfect and that the startup journey is hard.
I'm so happy that you disagreed with me. And I think if people are going to disagree, it makes sense for us because, we come at this from two different parts of the equation, like two different sides of this coin. And I actually disagree with the advice you've just given as well. But I'm glad to have this disagreement because I wanted to more deeply understand this. So I would say I 70% agree with what you're saying. VCs are a great validation point. VCs see way more businesses than you see. And depending on the kind of founder they probably speak to more founders than you and seek out more information about the industry and stuff like that as well. Like they're a great source of information. But I definitely made the mistake early on of using VCs almost like our North Star. Like whatever a VC says is true. And that's actually not true. It's like your customers. Your customers don't always know what they want. VCs don't necessarily always know what they want. If you're doing something truly groundbreaking, it might not be able to be understood by someone else but you. It's a vision that's only so clear in your head. So I think first and foremost, build the business and the future that you're trying to be a part of. Like build a great company for you, like above all else. Because if you just build by consensus of different VCs, you will get the average. And that's not what you are. You want to be the outlier. So be the fuck yeah, do the fuck yeah things. That being said, use VCs as a data point, listen to them, and like all mentors, understand if that advice is actually good for you. And if it is good, take it on and absolutely live it out. But just because a VC says it doesn't mean it's right. And just because you had it as an initial idea doesn't mean it's right either. But use it as an additional data point, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely bang on. I think if I were to temper what I said so that it's more nuanced, I was responding specifically in the context of like how much progress you need to get venture funding. Yeah. And to your point about building the business you want, the big important point is that not everything is about venture funding, and not every business should be a venture-backed business. Yes. There's so much focus in tech news on, oh, this startup got this venture funding and this startup got this valuation. And so it feels like the ultimate benchmark of what success looks like is getting venture funding, but it's not. I totally agree. It's about like building a great business that solves a problem for the people you're trying to solve that problem for, as well as building the kind of business that you want to lead and be a part of. So I totally agree. And I think you should kind of, it's hard because everyone wants to give you advice on your startup. And I think that VCs really vary in quality. And so you could get some really terrible advice from VCs and you could get some really great advice from VCs. So I think what you said is really bang on.
That's a really actually important nuance there, is that some VCs are great and some are terrible. Like there are just like some founders are great and some founders are shitty. Like be careful who you take advice from. Like getting advice and surrounding yourself with the right people is so important, but just surrounding yourself with anyone can be an absolute mistake. Okay. I love this. I'm so glad I brought this question up because I think it just like, look, to Dimness, I think maybe there's some conflicting information in here, but you've just got to work out of this what works for you. But I think generally we're all saying the same thing. Find the investors and the people that you should surround yourself with. Build relationships with those people because you can learn a lot from these people. And the longer you have relationships with people, that's another way of validating to them that you are the right founder for the job. And then more validation is always better. Casey and I might disagree on how much validation you need. But I think we both agree that the more validation you have, the easier it is to raise as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Dimness, you've been advised and I hope you can take something good out of that, a useful chunk out of that. All right. We'll probably do 2 questions today because that was just a great conversation and we spent a bit of time on that one. So the next challenge is called, my business idea already exists in another country. I had a great business idea that would solve a very specific problem for myself and for other people dealing with it. So I looked up to see if there are any companies currently operating that type of business. I live in the United States, but there is one company who's doing exactly what I want to do here, but they're in another country. They're pretty small, but have a great online presence. I admire what they do, and I don't want to copy them. But I'm not going to lie, their design, direction, and business model is probably what I would have executed. Of course, if I do start the business, I want to do it better. I think their business model would be very successful in the US, since there is a much bigger market here. Is this business worth starting? I don't want to copy what they do exactly, and also I don't have the funding to begin a startup. Any advice? From Cola 2346.
All right. Yeah, this is an interesting one because when I was founding businesses before I was at SquarePeg and playing with ideas, I worried about this a lot. And I often reflect on the fact that I wouldn't worry about this like basically at all now that I'm a VC and see how things play out. I worried about this because, I was like, someone else is already doing this. Their website looks great. Everyone's putting their best foot forward online about how many users they have. I would say as a VC, you never really know, or VCs can see the inside of these startups that other founders can't see, right? And sometimes startups that look like they're doing really well, they're in the press all the time, are actually a bit of a mess on the inside and not doing particularly well. And so I think that's one thing, that everyone always looks like they're doing better. Similar to social media, everyone's putting their best foot forward. And so I would really kind of back yourself, which comes to the second point, which is I think that ideas are cheap and it's really about the ability to execute and the team that you put behind it. And so again, back your ability to build something great, particularly if you have this great vision, right? It sounds like this person's super passionate about the idea and the concept and how they would do it with a bit of a different spin. And so I think they should absolutely go for it. Thirdly, in terms of feeling perhaps guilty on taking the idea or copying it, they came up with the concept before they even saw the other idea. There's a concept that I really like called simultaneous invention. And it's this phenomenon where sometimes scientific ideas, for some reason, even though we haven't been able to solve them for decades or centuries, just get solved in a matter of the same few weeks or same few months. And I think it's not surprising if it's a great idea that you would have also come up with that idea. And I think that person has absolutely every right to run at that and give it their best shot. So that, I think, covers perhaps some of the guilt around doing the same thing and whether they should run at it. They also said that they don't know if they'll be able to get funding or don't have funding currently, but we can kind of address that separately in a second. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Joel.
Yeah, just fucking go for it. You said the best thing. Ideas are cheap. Whatever your initial idea for a business is, it's definitely wrong. There might be some truth in that original idea that it becomes, but whatever you're thinking of now, it's wrong. It needs to iterate. You're going to make so many mistakes along the way. The success of your business is so much more determined on your ability to keep iterating and persist towards a real problem in a market that's growing. So if you believe that this is a market that's growing, there's a real opportunity here. If you've got the fucking effort and the courage to go for it, just go after it. Who cares if it's in another country? If anything, you should be encouraged by that. I actually wish there were more competitors with Vigo, because then we wouldn't have to take all of the burden of educating the industry around this new way of doing things. So they're already doing it. Also, you don't have much funding. Are they doing stuff that works well? Steal ideas. Who cares? You're in a different market. Take inspiration. Obviously, don't copy everything, but see what they're doing well, see what they're doing bad, and also reach out to them and make friends with them. Because the reality is if you're both successful, you'll probably merge or buy one another in the future anyway. So you may as well have those relationships from the beginning. I would just see it as it's a great sign to start a business. I like it when there's early people doing the same kind of stuff, because they're just making the mistakes that you can potentially avoid as well. And if they go down a different path to you at some point, you can work out, should I be going down that path? Have they made a mistake? You've just got other data points in there as well. So I don't think you definitely shouldn't feel bad about starting it. There are actually companies out there who just copy other ideas and have a crack at it, and they make tons of money. I don't think necessarily morally they're doing the right thing, but there is definitely precedent to go down this path, and I wouldn't be scared that there's another party there. I'd be stoked by it. But like you, Casey, I used to be scared. I was like, oh shit, someone else had come up with the same idea. No one will persist like me. This is my destiny to this business, so I don't care anymore. I'm like, great, spend some money, learn some things, and I'll see what I can take from that.
Yeah, so many great points. Thank you, Joel. I'm almost more concerned that they only found one competitor. In the age of a proliferation of startups, I expect to be able to see, when people send me a deck, quite a few different competitors. And also there's an obvious point to be made that your competition isn't just your direct competition of companies doing exactly what you are. It's what people already do today and all of the kind of different people that could kind of move into your space. But I certainly don't think it should be a deterrent. As we've both made the point, it really comes down to team and execution. I loved your point about knowledge and educating the market. That was something that I absolutely saw at Uber. We spent a huge amount of time educating the market on ride sharing, educating regulators, spending a lot of money on acquiring new customers because it was such a new category. And then our competitors came in and all the hard work had already been done for them.
Yeah.
And this brings me to a point that I was researching recently on the AI side, which is we were wondering if there's an optimal time to invest in a new technology wave. Is it that you have to invest in players right at the start of a wave? Can you do it in the middle? Should you wait until the end? And, some people in the team felt they had a hypothesis that you should invest in the earliest players in a new wave. So in this case, AI. And actually, when you look at the data, it's mostly the follow-on players that came in the kind of second wave of companies in the space. So second wave internet players, second wave social media players, etc., that actually succeed the most, maybe because of the kind of enormous amount of education that's required in the early stages, and because they learn from their competitors. They see the mistakes that their competitors made and they build something better. And so I think there's always a lot of opportunity to build on top of what people have already built.
I love that. That's such a good additional context about like the burden of educating a market. Like it is a lot of effort, and like, you know, there's, for some founders, there's only so much effort that they can give. So ride the wave if someone else has already done it. Well, I think we've kind of landed on a great answer here, which is, you know, if someone is thinking of an idea and it's already launched in another country, should that deter you? Not at all. It should be great encouragement, and you should use that as a point of validation that someone else is already doing this, someone else is already raised, someone else is already having this success. Like there is something here. It's not fully proved yet, obviously, but it means that you're not out there doing all of the heavy lifting. You can learn from some of the stuff they're doing. They're taking some of the burden of educating the market, and competitors are there. You know, make friends with them if you can. Like not everyone's, I think, in the position or mature enough to do that or sees the benefit in, but I love making friends with potential competitors because I think, you know, in the future they become useful relationships because you're all passionate about the same problem at the end of the day. So you probably have more in common with them than anyone else in the world, and also keeps you sharp. You won't get sloppy when there's a competitor biting at your heels too. So yeah, I think, you know, there's no point to shy away. Lean in more if anything. All right, that's it. Cola 2346, you've been advised. We'll move on to the last section of the show, which is plugs. So tell me, Casey, what do you want to plug at the moment? What's going on in your life?
I'd love to plug my blog, Artificially Intelligent. I know that it's such a cliche for a VC to have a blog, but I genuinely really enjoy writing. When people ask me about, you know, my LinkedIn posts, about advice for founders, it just comes from, as I said, wanting to pay it forward and a love of writing. And what I do on my blog is I actually have the kind of great privilege of meeting some really phenomenal experts in the AI space. So I spend time regularly catching up with like VPs at NVIDIA and Amazon and Google, and I get invited to events that people otherwise wouldn't have access to. And so I basically meet those folks and in a very anonymized kind of high level way, summarize what I'm hearing from them. And I also try and link that back to how we're thinking about investing in AI and how we think about the sustainable value of AI businesses and where everything's going in the future. And so it's kind of a bit of a learn in public approach, and I'm learning from these experts and I want to be able to share that. And so I'd love kind of readership and feedback on that. I really thrive on feedback, and I'm really hopeful that it's an opportunity for founders to learn alongside me.
If you don't want to do the research yourself, copy someone else. So go and see the research that Casey's doing. I don't know if I'm making this up or not, but I feel like there's something about your blog, and it's called something like Musings or something like that. Like that's the way you describe your writing blog.
Oh, I've actually now forgotten it as well. It's something like Reflections. I forget what it's called.
Yeah. But like the way I read...
Oh, Ruminations.
Ruminations. I love that word. And it's such a good description of like the way Casey writes as well. Like it brings you along a thought process. Like it's not this like dry, like, AI does this kind of thing. So like it's actually like it's interesting to follow along. Like it engages you. So I love the articles, I love the blog, and I love the LinkedIn post as well. And Casey's happen to have controversial opinions too, which is great because, you know, I think a lot of VCs shy away from that too. So you get Casey's real thoughts, you know where she stands on stuff, which is cool. So I recommend it. I'll throw it in the show notes too. And then on my side, as always, I am going to shamelessly plug myself. Like and subscribe. Get out your phone right now. 5 stars. Send some comments through. Send some feedback. And then, as always, steal a phone. We totally condone stealing phones here. Steal a phone and rate and review on that stolen phone. So, look, thank you to everyone who writes in. We love your problems. We love your questions. If you've got a question you want us to answer as well, send those through to podcast@joelditrapani.com. And as always, I have my booking link in the show notes. So if you want to have a conversation, tell me what's going on in your world. Tell me what's going on in your startup. I love these conversations. I love deeply understanding what founders are going through and how they're solving those things as well. And that's everything. So, Casey, I'm going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you for disagreeing with me. I love disagreeing on this show. It's so good to see 2 different opinions on something. So this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you for arguing and laughing with me today. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you for disagreeing with me. It's so important for us to hear the founder perspective. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts as well. And I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on the podcast.
Well, this has been another week of the Do As I Say, Not As I Did podcast. We'll see you all next week.